The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So by now, both presidential candidates, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, are preparing for the presidential debates that are apparently going to happen. I told you a few weeks ago that Donald Trump started sort of laying the groundwork for potentially not debating Hillary Clinton. There's every indication that the debates are going to happen. Their debate prep tactics have been written about, and they could not be more different. And not surprisingly, Donald Trump's debate prep tactics, and I hate to even call them that because there's not that much prep going on, are absolutely hilarious. So Hillary Clinton is reading briefing books about policy. She's reading opposition research on Donald Trump. She's working with debate coaches who are very experienced. She's rehearsing delivery and talking points over and over and over again. And Donald Trump is sort of taking a little bit of a different approach. He's sort of casually hanging out with Rudy Giuliani, Mr. 9/11, as he's known to many. He's hanging out with right-wing radio host Laura Ingraham, as well as disgraced former Fox News chairman Roger Ailes, while eating cheeseburgers, hot dogs, drinking Coca-Cola, and instead of focusing on policy, they are testing out zingers and insults. And this is all according to a recent report by the Washington Post. I recently read an article about Tony Schwartz, who ghost wrote Donald Trump's infamous book, The Art of the Deal. And Tony Schwartz talks about how Donald Trump just has no attention span, and he'd be shocked if Donald Trump had even read a single book cover to cover in the last 30 years. And this seems to be having an impact on debate prep. The reported briefing books that have been put together for Donald Trump about Hillary Clinton have not been read. Donald Trump has reportedly not been doing any mock debates, boasting that he doesn't really need to. And of course, the miscommunication, Jason, between Trump and his campaign staff continues, because yesterday, Kellyanne Conway, Trump's co-campaign manager, was asked, will Trump do mock debates? And she said something like, sure, if we need to, but maybe not. But we're going to do everything that needs to be done. But Trump is not conventional. There really is an indication that Trump can't focus, like almost like an ADHD type of thing, where if there's many reports of when he's being interviewed, the reporters will mention there was a TV on sort of in the background and Trump couldn't even pay attention to me because he was distracted by the TV. That's not going to play that well in the debates. I assume that watching that sort of ADHD mentality when it's just two people is different when you have 17 people on stage. When it's Trump and Hillary Clinton, he's got to be able to focus, I think.
Yeah, he's like a washed up, old, beat up prize fighter who's been knocked around so many times that his brain is just not quite there anymore, you know?
It's unclear whether it ever was, but that's sort of a more detailed question. And then there's the question of whether Trump really needs to be able to go deep on any issues, because when you read that he's preparing with zingers, you would conventionally think, okay, well, Hillary Clinton's going to be very well prepared. She's going to be able to go into depth on issues and really go point counterpoint. You would think that Donald Trump in a conventional election would need to be able to go just as deep and justify his points of view. The alternative, though, is that he just does prepare these zingers, and I don't know that that's going to be effective at convincing moderates, but Trump's own supporters would see that, and they'd probably afterwards feel that Trump won.
Yeah, he's just getting ready for a shouting match. He's going to try to lure her into his realm, if you will, and get into a verbal fist fight. But I think she's going to take the high road here. She's well versed. She's well trained. She knows what to say. She's not going to get lured into this tactic.
I agree. I don't believe that Hillary Clinton is going to fall into the same sort of back and forths that some of the Republican contenders fell into. What will be interesting to see is how the public perceives what is probably going to be a very aggressive and sort of ad hominem heavy Donald Trump in these debates. And everything we know about how they're preparing for these debates probably tells us a lot about how those debates are going to go. I am very anxiously awaiting those debates. Speaking of Trump and policy, Donald Trump now, in the midst of flip-flop after flip-flop on his deportation force and his policy on undocumented immigration, has announced he is going to give a major speech tomorrow night, Wednesday night. And the backstory of this entire thing is that the deportation, the forced deportation at our expense of 11 million undocumented immigrants from the United States was sort of the baseline around which Trump built his campaign. It was about Mexico sending us the rapists, it was about banning Muslims, and it was about forcefully deporting all undocumented immigrants in the U.S. Cut to last week, after 15 months of this repetitive statement that everybody's getting deported, and Trump started testing or going potentially in a different direction, saying we're going to focus on really the criminal undocumented immigrants. We're not necessarily going to just start kicking everybody out. We need to have empathy. We need to sort of do exactly what it is that President Barack Obama has been doing, although he didn't exactly say that most recently. And that didn't really go well. This backfired completely because many people on the right, many Republican voters, saw this for what it is, which is partial amnesty, something that they are very much against. Trump tried to distinguish between so-called violent criminals who are undocumented in the U.S. and those who are here illegally, and that is their only crime. And the problem for Trump is that many of the hardline Republicans don't see a difference. For them, if you're here illegally, that is as important of a crime as if you are here illegally and assaulted someone or robbed a bank or killed someone or whatever. So then Donald Trump had to flip-flop again at a rally over the weekend, strengthening the language again and saying, we are going to deport people. People are going to go out, et cetera, et cetera. Now this is a huge mess, and Donald Trump apparently is going to try to fix it one more time. He tweeted yesterday, I will be making a major speech on illegal immigration on Wednesday in the great state of Arizona. Big crowds looking for a larger venue. This is going to be pretty interesting because Trump hasn't spoken in detail about a single issue for this entire campaign that he's been running, and it hasn't seemed to matter because it's not clear that voters actually expect Donald Trump to give any firm policies. They seem really comfortable with the idea that, hey, Trump has a general idea and he has these general principles. Bad people out. We need a border. We need a country. He'll sort of figure out the details later on. And one perfect example I'll put up on the screen for you from a recent NPR article that actually talked to a Nevada voter named Judy Callahan, who spoke to Sarah McCammon and said, listen, not everything Trump says is true. I mean, it's not true like it's in concrete. He said he would stop the border flow. He would build some kind of wall and he would work on the people that are here. That's all there is. The rest is kind of fluff. Other people also said, well, we assume that what Trump says is just a starting point for a negotiation. It's not necessarily set in stone. And this goes to the brilliance. I've criticized so many aspects of what Trump has done from a political strategy perspective, Jason, where I've said, this is bad strategy. This is not going to win votes. But I've also praised this taking every position and everything is sort of negotiable. And really what it's about is I'm a good manager and I'll bring in good people, which he hasn't done. But it is actually working. I predicted that it's great to actually take every position at some point because everybody can find a position they like on any particular issue. If you want the aggressive forced deportation of 11 million people, he has said that. If you want deporting just the really bad ones and having more empathy, he's been on record as saying that as well. And I think strategically for the low information Trump voter, it's brilliant strategy.
Yeah, he's treating this campaign as a giant focus group where he goes to every single segment of the population, tells them exactly what they want to hear, and then retracts it later, except no one's hearing the retractions. So I'm excited for this. He's going to actually lay out a concrete plan.
Well, maybe.
But so we'll see if he will actually stick to any of these, or is he going completely new? Is he going to just copy and paste Barack Obama's immigration plan?
Yeah, we might see something Trump seems to have taken every position on this issue already. We might still see a new position that he can concoct between now and tomorrow night's speech. Last thought on this, and I do have to move on. I don't think any of this is to court Hispanic voters. in the same way that none of the so-called black outreach that backfired is to court black voters. This is all to appeal to moderate white voters who are very skeptical about Trump. Okay, let's talk about trigger warnings and safe spaces. The dean at the University of Chicago informed incoming freshmen last week that the university will not condone safe spaces or trigger warnings on campus. Here's a quote from the letter from John Ellison, the dean of students, saying, "Once here, you will discover that one of the University of Chicago's defining characteristics is our commitment to freedom of inquiry and expression. Members of our community are encouraged to speak, write, listen, challenge, and learn without fear of censorship. We do not support so-called trigger warnings. We do not cancel invited speakers because their topics might prove controversial, and we do not condone the creation of intellectual safe spaces where individuals can retreat from ideas and perspective at odds with their own." Huge reaction online. Some people saying this is great. The University of Chicago is not going to coddle students. They are not going to shield students from what many might perceive as bigotry or offensive comments or whatever. And then there are others who have been critical of this letter, saying, you know what? They are going above and beyond and proactively saying, you are going to be offended here. I don't agree with that critique. I think very few people in our audience are going to agree with my view, Jason, because I completely and wholeheartedly support the content of this letter. I am against these trigger warnings. I am against these safe spaces. I believe that you are not being prepared for a life in the real world if from ages 18 to 22, you were protected from anything that might be traumatic or offensive or whatever. Colleges as a whole should be safe spaces for all ideas to be explored. No actual physical violence should be tolerated. No actual bullying or shouting down of any ideas should be tolerated, but it's not productive or conducive. I think I just made another new Urban Dictionary word there, producive. I expect that to be there by tomorrow. It's not conducive nor productive if we are trying to build leaders and people to exist in the real world to protect them in this way in colleges. However, I don't agree with actually sending this letter. And the reason I don't agree with it is I don't actually think that this is a statement colleges should have to make. By default, it should be assumed that colleges are not spaces for safe spaces or trigger warnings. And I know people might hear this and say, but David, because they've become that in many ways, it's perfectly legitimate for the University of Chicago to put together this letter and proactively say it will not be allowed. I say, wait until the trigger warnings and safe spaces are attempted at your school, and then say that you don't stand behind them. But I don't know that I agree with the proactive delivery of this letter, although I 110% agree with its content.
Yeah, well, that's a tough one. I believe in the trial by fire, the experience of the world, and that you actually have to go out there and experience and get hardened by society, because it is a cold, hard world out there.
And I know that's what a lot of people say. And I don't even go that far. For me, it's just, if you're going to work somewhere, if you're going to exist in the real world, if you're going to even go to the grocery store, I hear offensive, racist, insulting stuff all the time. I hear stuff in the real world all the time that I recognize if somebody had a traumatic experience in their past related to race discrimination, related to sexual assault, etc. I get how those things could be jarring in some way. But if for 4 years in college, you are sort of conditioned to expect that you will be artificially isolated from those realities will only be more destructive when you get out of college and go to the real world. And that's sort of my big picture on this.
Yeah, there's a fine line there, though, because at some point it becomes assault. It's not, obviously not battery, but assault is just threatening people. And, you know, there's a very fine line there to be ridden by these schools, because they become liable at some point for this.
But that's not what the letter was about, to be clear. And I agree with you. Anytime, I don't want... Sometimes critiques of political correctness are really just anger by people who want to be deliberately offensive, and I don't support that. And sometimes critiques of safe spaces and trigger warnings are coming from people who just want to deliberately be offensive and upset other people. And I don't support that use of these policies or fighting back against these policies. But big picture, I think I've been clear sort of about my view, and I'm curious to hear from the audience about this. Number one is the content of the letter, which I agree with. And number two, it's the choice to send this letter to freshmen as they are coming into the school before they've even been subjected to these trigger warnings and safe spaces. That I am not so thrilled with. Send me your thoughts and we'll definitely follow up about it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Sean Larson. Thank you so much, Sean. We do exist exclusively because of the support of our audience through the membership program, and I encourage you to join Sean, become member of the day one day in the future. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. And of course, remember, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, first visit davidpakman.com/Amazon. That will make it so that your shopping supports our show. I was at Fenway Park over the weekend for a baseball game, and I put up on my Instagram, david.pakman, a picture from my seats at Fenway Park. I basically always sit in the right field grandstand. I love Fenway Park. I grew up going there. I know you've been there many times, Jason. I love going there in spite of the horribly uncomfortable seats, in spite of the obstructed view, which you can see in this picture. All of that stuff doesn't bother me. What is really increasingly disturbing to me is just the rampant corporatism at sporting events. And over the years, first it was one company logo on the left field green monster, and then it was two company logos, and then it was three, and then it was the actual seats on the green monster were sponsored by someone, and then the scoreboard was made possible by someone else, and blah, 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 blah. You can't go to the bathroom at Fenway Park without being exposed to corporate sponsors. And it's been a couple years since I went to a game, so it was particularly jarring. Every inch of that place is made possible by or sponsored by some major corporation.
And you think somehow through this, the seat prices might go down?
Right.
At one point,
way up.
At one point, it was $5 bleacher seats. What are they, $50 now, I think?
What I recall is that some years ago, you could get day of standing room only seats against the Yankees for $15, and they're now up to something like $55, if I recall correctly. Now, that may have been not the face value, that might have been the resale price. I don't exactly remember. But it's bad. It's really, really bad. And you can check out this picture on my Instagram account. Also, I put out on Instagram a behind-the-scenes picture of last week's durian experiment, and there were people who thought that this was some kind of dead animal or maybe something from a coral reef that I took a picture of. This is a fruit called durian, which we tried. There were many people who were triggered from traumatic experiences on public transit in Asian countries, where some cities have now banned durian on buses. People wrote to me saying, oh, I lived in Thailand, in some specific part of Thailand. You're not allowed to bring durian on because of the vile smell that it emanates. And I certainly experienced that. There was no doubt.
Yeah, it kind of did smell like there was a dead animal here a little while. And I was on the other side of the room, so I didn't get the full effect. But yeah. I know there's calls of headaches and other nauseated kind of feelings on the other side of the room. So
Rachel reported heart palpitations after and lightheadedness. Yeah. So all those pictures and more on my Instagram account. Follow me at david.pakman. Okay, let's talk about the third sexting scandal involving former New York Congressman Anthony Weiner. Yet again, caught sexting women. Weinergate 2011, as it has come to be known, led to Anthony Weiner's resignation as a congressman. Then, in 2013, he was running for mayor of New York City. 3 women exposed that he had been sexting with them. That ended his mayoral run. And now, this taking place in 2015, but being revealed over the last 24 to 48 hours, yet again, a report that Anthony Weiner was sexting with another woman, this time ending his marriage to Hillary Clinton confidant Huma Abedin, who has said she is leaving Anthony Weiner. The concern now is their son. Speaking of their son, if you're looking at this picture that we are displaying, Anthony Weiner sexting a picture, apparently a picture in which he was very, very excited, to say the least. And his son, a baby at the time, is in the picture that he sexted to this woman that he was in touch with. And indeed, the New York Times now reporting that Weiner and Abedin have separated. Now, I don't care that much about Anthony Weiner and his sexting. The guy clearly is having a major, major problem. This is completely humiliating to his wife, Hillary Clinton's advisor, Huma Abedin. This is not good for their son. This is clearly a guy with serious issues. But I'm more interested in how Donald Trump all of a sudden is in the middle of this disastrous scandal by trying to critique Hillary Clinton as a result. Donald Trump actually saying there is blame here for Hillary Clinton. This is from a Donald Trump statement on Hillary Clinton's bad judgment. Abedin, Trump said, quote, is making a very wise decision. I know Anthony Weiner well, and she will be far better off without him. Adding, I only worry for the country in that Hillary Clinton was careless and negligent in allowing Weiner to have such close proximity to highly classified information. Who knows what he learned and who he told? It's just another example of Hillary Clinton's bad judgment. It is possible that our country and its security have been greatly compromised by this. Let me remind you that Donald Trump is on his third wife, has a reputation for being a womanizer, has any number of problems. I would have stayed out of it if I were Donald Trump, but apparently Donald Trump couldn't. So then let's analyze what he's saying. Trump is saying that individuals 2 layers of separation removed from the candidate, those associations are problematic. I hate to break it to Trump, but if you were to look at everybody who's 2 layers away from Donald Trump, there would be some disturbing people in there. And I don't think that this is a door Donald Trump wants to open.
He's not afraid to open any door at this point. Anything is just good press to him. He's going to talk about everyone. He's going to say weird things about Dwayne Wade's cousin being murdered. Anything's open for this classless monster.
Trump's critique is just so flaccid, for lack of a better term. Because if he really had a problem with Anthony Weiner's behavior, he wouldn't be associated with the people he's associated with, like Roger Ailes, who has now been accused of sexual harassment by 20 women. Just for fun, here's a reminder from a press conference after one of Anthony Weiner's previous sexting scandals. This is when the Howard Stern show's Benji Bronk showed up and asked what I admit were some really funny questions of Anthony Weiner. Take a look at this.
Message, but I certainly wouldn't obviously do the things that I have done that led me to this place. Of course I would. Of course I would. No, I did not. I did not.
Will you help to support Arnold's love child?
Yes.
Thank you.
They were inappropriate. They were part of consensual, exchanges of emails, and I don't want to violate the privacy of the women who were involved, but it was clearly a mistake and one that I deeply regret. Thank you.
Were you fully erect?
What made you decide?
Were you fully erect or were you?
Anthony Weiner taking any and all questions, taking full.
I don't like to make light of what is a horrible family situation for Huma Abedin, but showing up and asking Anthony Weiner, number one, whether he was shocked that Arnold Schwarzenegger had sex with, quote, such an ugly woman. Number two, whether he would help to support Arnold Schwarzenegger's love child. And number three, whether in the gray panties he was fully aroused or capable of more. That is a level of parody that I find absolutely hilarious.
Did I actually hear him say yes to the love child, or was
he was answering a different question?
Okay, but you can't help but think.
It looked like he was saying yes, he would help to support Arnold's love child. This may be the end. Now I'm more comfortable saying this is the end of Anthony Weiner's political career. Real quick, really, really disturbing news from one of the most horrible neoconservative war hawks and architects of the 2003 Iraq War, former Bush administration official Paul Wolfowitz, who is the epitome of a neoconservative extremist, says Donald Trump is dangerous and that it would be really bad if he became president of the United States. He said in an interview published a few days ago that, I wish there were somebody I could be comfortable voting for. I might have to vote for Hillary Clinton, even though I have big reservations about her. He says he admires Putin, that Saddam Hussein was killing terrorists, that the Chinese were impressive because they were tough on Tiananmen Square. That is pretty disturbing. The only way you can be comfortable about Trump's foreign policy is to think he doesn't really mean anything he says. That's a pretty uncomfortable place to be in. This is arguably one of the most prominent neoconservatives and interventionists of the last 15 years. And Donald Trump is too reckless for the guy who wanted the United States to go to war in Iraq. When I see Wolfowitz talking about the 2016 election, I see someone whose support nobody wants or should want anyway. This really shows us the scope and caliber of exactly how dangerous even neoconservatives see Donald Trump as being. And I know some people will email me and they'll say, David, this is not about Wolfowitz being concerned about Trump. This is about Wolfowitz liking Hillary because she's the neoconservative war hawk. Well, if that's the case, he's not saying it because he's making very clear that he's not comfortable with Hillary Clinton. It's just that Trump would be so reckless that he might actually end up voting for Hillary Clinton. Incredibly disturbing, incredibly damning. This is one of the worst political war hawks of the last 15 years. And he's scared about what Donald Trump might do as president of the United States. That is some serious food for thought.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by David Sparks, who is a Democratic candidate for state representative in Ohio's 43rd House District, joining us today from Dayton, Ohio. David and I have known each other for, I guess, close to a couple of years at this point. He did some work with our website some time ago and continues to be a sort of tech advisor, I would say. And he is running in Ohio's 43rd House District. David, first, for people, we've been talking about the importance of down ballot. We've been talking about the importance of building a progressive base within states. Talk a little bit about the dynamics of your race and sort of what you're up against right now.
Wow. The dynamics of my race really came to a fore yesterday, which we'll get to. But yeah, I'm running in the 43rd district of for Ohio State Representative, and the 43rd district is it's just above the city of Dayton limits, and it goes all the way out into Preble County, Ohio, which is right on the Indiana border in southwest Ohio. And yeah, this was a race that a lot of people expected. You know, we've got an incumbent in office with lots and lots of money, but we started campaigning last December in 0-degree weather. And have been doing so all the way through the summer in 95-degree weather, sometimes with heat indexes up around 105. And as we saw yesterday, they're very worried that a grassroots campaign that doesn't take big money, doesn't take all of the associated stuff that our traditional establishment politics takes. They're scared that we're going to win, and so. That's what happened yesterday. But
yeah, I want to get to that in a second. I mean, explain. I think what's interesting about this race is tell our audience the number of votes you expect it will take to win, because I think many people sometimes don't have a good sense of the reality that in a lot of these state house seats, you can put together a grassroots campaign without taking big money and be competitive because of the scale of some of these districts. Talk to us about the number of votes you think the winner will require here.
Yeah, I've been told it's, I'm not sure the exact number, it's over 28,000. And I'm not sure the exact hundreds number, but it's around 28,000. And my district has they have ratings, performance ratings, and it has a 51.6% Democratic performance rating, which means that I was picked to win from the beginning, but not having all the big money and all that stuff, so that kind of put me behind. But we put together a volunteer force. I worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign. Some of the field organizers have come, from the Sanders campaign to work with me after that's all been after that all finished. And you can get out and knock on, when you figure like 28,000, well, a lot of that 28,000 are base Democratic voters. You're going to get their votes. So actually it goes down as far as like the number of people you actually need to convert.
Sure.
And the same thing, would hold true on the Republican side if you were running things. So yeah, you're going towards a middle that's more like 10 to 15,000. And with, a group of 5 people out canvassing, out, putting signs up, out speaking and advocating and doing social media, which I think the other side just doesn't know how to handle at all. You can reach thousands of people, and we can win these races. And right now we've got 19 state house races that are running unopposed. Had I not gotten onto the ballot, my race would have been completely unopposed, handed on a silver platter to my opponent.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because your Republican incumbent opponent is clearly getting worried. The smear attempts have begun. I want to talk about this press conference in a second, but first for our audience, I want to play just about a minute of a video that has come out attempting to smear you. Take a look at this.
Welcome to the David Sparks Show, an ongoing exploration of issues and thought by award-winning journalist, artist, and musician David Sparks.
What are we going to talk about this week? What's on your mind?
Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me.
We should show our warts and all.
Exactly.
And then I'm sure there are people on the other side who are like,
come on. We don't want to see sex, though.
yes, we don't want to know anybody dating does
Don't
it.
remind us.
Don't know that they do it.
Yeah.
They're doing it.
Stop.
They're doing it. They're doing it for themselves. That's all I got to say. Come on, America, be real.
Be real.
Yeah. Get real. You didn't get here from going, ooh. You got here from bow chicka wow chicka wow chicka wow wow. When I was 14 years old, I felt a titty for the first time. And it was an amazing feel. As a matter of fact, it pretty much threw everything out of my mind. It wasn't titty.
Yeah. So, David, if this is what they're using to attempt to smear you, they're concerned, right?
Yeah, because it actually totally flipped on them. I've had so many people say, like, wow, I really like you a lot more after watching that. That shows you're a real person with a real sense of humor. And, all of these videos, we did, online style is a lot different than the traditional media. If I were to, I could take from some of the Young Turks or, folks like that who are really kind of really brash. We could disqualify from them for running for office for their entire lives, or any number of people.
No doubt about it. And then this escalated also, and I want to get to the part where we get to this press conference that you actually showed up at. Set the stage for the audience of how you were being smeared and exactly what you did.
Yeah, so I showed up at the press conference about a half hour beforehand, and the first 30 minutes or so were different people talking about my opponent, how great he was, and all that yada yada. And then they brought up the Speaker of the Ohio House to do the hatchet job on me. And he played this video montage that had been taken from, I've probably got 700 videos, 600, I've lost count, There are music videos, there are comedy videos. Most of them are community journalism videos where I've advocated for things like not closing post offices in poor minority communities, or doing investigative journalism where we've exposed mismanagement within privatized operators in our county jail. Or I could go on and on. I've done a lot beyond this. This kind of stuff is just kind of a segment of my whole creative world. And we had a lot of fun doing them, and people really, they've always said, we love you and your wife, what you guys are doing. You keep it real. It's fun. And essentially it's just art, and it's all done like long before ever really got involved in politics.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me sort of like, I mean, this is not an exact analogy because, again, you are mixing in completely serious citizen journalism in what you do, but it's almost in a way like if an actor were to run for office and then you would critique that actor as an elected official or potential elected official based on characters they played in fiction pieces. And I know that's not all that you've done, but there's some element of that here, isn't there?
Of course, yeah. A lot of all the music pieces that they featured were from my band Drexel, and you can listen to us at drexel.bandcamp.com. We performed around the Midwest, from Detroit to Memphis, all places, for around 10 years. We were written up in like national music magazines, regional music magazines. Got a lot of critical praise. Yeah, and it was an act. Like, part of that act was based upon, our influences that we got from life. But yeah, essentially it was show business. We were having fun. We were making art.
Yeah. So you show up at this press conference. In addition, they were also adding the element of slamming you, smearing you for drug use years and years ago that you had admitted to. So tell our audience what you do. I mean, it strikes me as it's got to be somewhat uncomfortable to show up when you're the subject of smears and say, "Hey, here I am."
Well, actually, I kind of enjoyed showing up. So we got there, I showed up and sat right in the front row, and they did their thing. And then came the hatchet man, Cliff Rosenberg, and he started showing the clips. And once he got to like the one song about me, it was like the song was about me touching a breast for the first time when I was 14 years old, and how like it became the center of my entire world for a while after that. And the whole thing was like, this is why we need proper. It was about the whole. They took it out of context. And they didn't mention the story included. We were talking about sex education and the lack of contraception and how different areas where they've cut sex education, the birth rate has skyrocketed. The HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases have skyrocketed. And so my song was about how we need to understand as adults how kids feel at that era of their life when they're discovering all their hormones and they're confused and they're like, oh my God, girls, 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 or boys, 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 boys. And we need to provide proper sexual education and, and reaffirm that like, this isn't weird for you. This is a natural part of growing up. And additionally, they played another video where we were having a discussion about the drug war and the nature of addiction. And I relayed the story honestly, that when I was 20 years old at a party at the University of Cincinnati, two metalhead guys came up to me and they were like, want to do this, man? And we did. And I said, I hated it. We smoked crack with these guys. Like when I was 20, and people have done, President Obama has admitted drug use, like all kinds of different politicians. Yeah. It'd be different, if I woke up every morning or did that. But, I wanted to be honest and relay this so people, we could talk honestly about the subject.
Of course.
And so they took something where I was attempting to add to the conversation a real experience and saying, I didn't like this stuff at all. And it said it in the video. Like I didn't like it, never did it again. The whole scene creeped me out. But yeah, apparently 30 years is not enough time to go through and mature from an experience. And so it ended up like totally backfiring in their face. Like all the comments we saw social media, on the news articles that we've read, were like, give me a break, you hypocrites. You go back and smoke cigars and drink martinis all night and just soak yourself in liquid drugs all the time. And if you've been around political conventions, you know what I'm talking about. The drug use is amazing. And like from, morning till night, these establishment political people drink. And in the hypocrisy involved in all of that. And so, yeah, they're trying to smear me for being completely honest and forthright. And it ended up, people were like, I like you more now, Dave. And so what happened was once he started going into these things, like he sings a song about touching a 14-year-old girl's breasts. And I yelled out, That song was about when I was 14 and touched my breast for the first time.
Well, if there's any better indication that you can run against these incumbents, Republicans at the state level all across the country, it's that your grassroots campaign is now the subject of these smears. If anything, this is evidence that you actually are making an impact. And I wish progressives had a better understanding of this. And of course, you can find out more about David Sparks' campaign at, it's votedavidsparks.com. Is that correct?
No,
votedavidsparks.org. I want to speak clearly this evening. Votedavidsparks.org in the 43rd House District. Joining us from Dayton, Ohio. David, thanks so much.
Hey, thank you very much for everything, David. You have a great day. I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Self-driving Uber vehicles are now driving around in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You can actually summon self-driving cars from your Uber app on your mobile phone. Pictures of the cars have been spotted. We know Google has been testing their self-driving car fleet for several years. We've talked about Tesla's autopilot. Full disclosure, I own some Tesla stock. Last week, Ford announced plans for its autonomous ride-sharing service, but we actually have self-driving autopilot type cars driving around in Pittsburgh. Now, because of the law, you can't actually have no driver, and I use that term sort of loosely, sitting in the driver's seat. There is someone who sits there in case something happens with the autopilot of the vehicle. But people are riding around in Ubers where the computer, the AI, the hard drive essentially of these cars is driving people around. And this is very, very interesting. Number one, it's interesting because every time I talked about this, Jason, you wouldn't know about this, but for the last 3 years, every time I've mentioned self-driving cars, I get angry emails from people saying, David, this is not going to happen. This is ridiculous. There are going to be no self-driving cars. And we now have self-driving trucks operating in a test corridor in the west of the United States. We have the self-driving Ubers in Pittsburgh. This is happening. Now it's a question of when people will be used to it. I guess I'd get in one of these self-driving Ubers.
Oh, I'm going to get in. I'm not afraid. The real question to me is, when are we getting self-driving Uber type drones that are going to fly me to my next destination instead of driving?
See, that I would understand people emailing me about and saying, David, you might want to spend a little less time on the self-driving flying cars. And that I would actually hear. But I still get people telling me this is fake. This is not ever going to happen when it's already happening. I've actually been thinking quite a bit about the impact that this could have on public mass transit, like buses and subways, because when you consider that buses and subways are only as cheap as they are in many cities because they're subsidized by either the state or other agencies, the real cost of a bus or subway ride is often quite higher than what people are paying. Private industry could drastically undercut the prices of public transit, especially once you phase out the need for drivers, because drivers are like the most expensive aspect of public transportation in most cases. You can really undercut public transit, and I could imagine a world in which we see significantly worsening traffic, because we know that every full bus that becomes people in cars has a huge impact on the traffic. That is actually one of my concerns. The AI, the safety of the driving algorithm, that is absolutely going to be figured out. I've been thinking more of the impact it could have on public transit, and it could be quite damaging.
On the AI front, though, I wonder if people are going to figure out when they see these things, if they're going to know what it's going to do. So say if you go to cut it off, is it going to stop every time? I feel like you're going to be in traffic and everyone's just going to be, there's certain cars in traffic that just get cut off. Is this is it going to keep that 2-foot zone where it can't get cut off, or is it going to be kind of the driver that gets always cut off, or what's going to happen there?
I have been thinking about that, and there's this thing called a Pittsburgh left, which is, I don't know how many people have heard about this. This is where if you imagine cars facing each other at a red light where you can either go straight or turn left. Typically, when you just get a solid green, not a green arrow, the people turning left have to wait for an opening from oncoming traffic. There's this thing called a Pittsburgh left, where there's sometimes an understanding where you let the first car that's turning left go through in order to make it so that they don't get stuck waiting until the yellow light and then have to shoot through. That's a very difficult thing to deal with when it comes to programming. So how would a self-driving car deal with the expectation from other drivers that you might be doing a Pittsburgh left? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, there's too many intangibles. I think especially if you start putting these behind big trucks, big buses, etc., they're just going to cause traffic jams. I mean, eventually they're going to figure it out, but I think there's going to be a window where there's going to be a lot of testing and a lot of stress testing that's going to need to happen.
I don't disagree with you, but that is not my long-term concern with these self-driving cars. I know that is going to be figured out. We'll see, though, what other chaos is temporarily caused in the meantime. Hey, remember this story about Stanford swimmer Brock Turner, who raped an unconscious girl on campus and then received a 6-month jail sentence after being convicted of rape? Prosecutors asked for 6 years in state prison. He's already almost out. He's scheduled to be released Friday from jail in Northern California. And California lawmakers yesterday passed a new law closing what they describe as a loophole that allowed this sentence. The bill now goes to Democratic Governor Jerry Brown. He hasn't said he is going to veto it. He hasn't said yet he is going to sign it. And what this basically does, and we've talked about this in other contexts, is establish certain mandatory minimum sentences for rape convictions. I have mixed feelings about this, big picture, but not mixed feelings about the problem we're having with light sentences on rape convictions. When we talk about mandatory minimums, we often talk about mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug offenders. And in the context of the war on drugs, mandatory minimums have been a disaster. I mean, terrible. They are putting nonviolent drug offenders who should not even be, what they are doing should not even be criminalized, but that's a different story. They are putting them in prisons because there are laws that say the judge cannot execute judicial discretion in many of these cases. The counterpoint, though, is that we've seen many sex offenders, rapists, sexual assaulters convicted and given laughably light sentences when there are no mandatory minimums. And then white-collar crime seems to be in the middle, where we've seen outrageously long sentences for some white-collar crimes, up to and including life sentences, but then at the same time, other white-collar criminals given very, very light sentences. So I'm conflicted about this, Jason, because of the toxic nature, in many cases, of these mandatory minimums.
Do you feel that the judge dropped, or the jury actually dropped the ball here in letting this slide, though? He should have been thrown in jail for more than 6 months, right?
It wasn't up to the jury. I mean, again, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. The prosecutors requested 6 years, and the judge, using his discretion, decided we are going to go with 6 months here.
There had to be some backdoor money or something, just some corrupt politics going. And another thing I heard the university drop the ball here as well. In the coming year, they're not allowing any hard alcohol on campus. They're almost like excusing this, saying this is an alcohol problem. This is not this individual's problem.
And even saying, beer is absolutely fine, but the hard alcohol, and I get it. There are establishments, business establishments, that also say, hey, we do beer and wine. We don't do hard alcohol because we find that it just keeps the crowd more under control. I totally get that. But at some point, we have to talk about the responsibility of the perpetrator as well. And starting to draw a line between what types of alcohol are allowed definitely starts to get into the realm of the sort of gray area as to who or what exactly is being blamed. So mandatory minimums, systemically very disturbing to me in terms of how they're used. At the same time, we do need to prevent these violent sexual offenders from getting 6 months and then also being able to get out early for good behavior. Tell me your thoughts on this. On which side are you falling? I have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call any time of day. Here's a voicemail I received yesterday.
Hey, Pac. All right, so the constant theme of your show is blacks are powerless. They, can't get anything done themselves. They need, a big white brother that helped him out, and, you know, we need to give the benefits.
Yeah.
But does it ever, like, occur to you that it might be racist to have this line of thought that blacks are powerless?
Yeah.
They can't get anything done themselves.
We can stop it there.
And
This is alluding to this idea of the subtle racism of low expectations. And what the caller is saying is, by arguing that black people need to be helped to achieve anything, am I not arguing that they just have absolutely no power or agency or way to help themselves? This is what we call a straw man argument. This is attacking me for a position I have never taken. And I hate to break it to you, but pointing out that certain laws are applied disproportionately by institutions of power, for example, or that there are historic racial inequalities which still are noticeable today in some ways that we need to account for, that is not arguing that black people or all brown people are powerless to help themselves. Jason is getting schooled very quickly here on what we call straw man arguments, calling in and very, very powerfully critiquing David Pakman for something he never actually said.
Yeah, I was the first thought I had there was, did you actually even say that? No, clearly not.
That's the right thought. If that's the first thought you're having, then you're absolutely on the right path as far as that goes. So yeah, I'm not going to defend that position because it's not a position I've ever taken. On the bonus show today, we now have seen the success of the first child to receive a double hand transplant. He is now writing and making lunch for himself. We will also continue our discussion of driverless taxis, which now also exist in Singapore. Is it similar to Pittsburgh to hail a driverless taxi in Singapore and Pittsburgh, or is it different? We will also follow up on some of your ideas about the future of the bonus show. Of course, you can sign up for instant access to the world famous bonus show at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.